What's that one blatantly illegal or unethical thing management forced you to do at work? Pass a concrete strength test that failed 2 of the 3 data points, but the third was high enough that the average was fine. The very small footbridge broke. They got sued. I quit. Story 2. I was told to run a remote overhead crane with only 3 wheels. It carried large coils of rolled-up aluminum for ladle treatment. The aluminum would swing and cause the missing wheel area to bottom out, causing more swing and making it worse. This was moving over my coworkers' heads. The foreman told me to keep doing it. I called the safety team and they came up and said, "Hell no." Another foreman came up and ordered me to run it, but have everyone clear the area. Okay, that's sort of safe, I guess, but killed production. The second foreman later reminded me that I hadn't filled out the daily safety inspection. Well, don't mind if I do. Red section. If anything is checked in this area, do not operate. Let's see. Missing wheel. Check. Mechanical problems. Check. The first foreman sees what I'm doing and says, "The wheel is on order, it's just not here yet." Okay, what's that got to do with this liability checklist I was told to fill out? Back to checklist. Oh, look, a write-in section. Ein-up crane ordered to be run by third foreman. Sign me smartass steelworker. The third foreman was the second guy. It was third shift. What he didn't know was he didn't come back to my area for the rest of the night, and the checklist was picked up by the general foreman in the morning when I got off. I came in that night to a crap storm. The safety team had lost its mind. That paper I filled out went directly to OSHA. That missing wheel showed up in record time, and they had been down all day fixing it. I showed up and it had just been certified by the millwrights. Story 3. This one idiot project manager tried to get me to ship already scrapped parts to a customer who was an idiot. It would have been pure profit since the parts would already have been scrapped. I tried to find something that would work, and there wasn't anything. We were at this insane impasse. Him. "You don't understand. He said that he'd take anything." Me. "You don't understand. Nothing will work." That ducking finally hauled me in front of my boss to try to pressure me and get me in trouble. I said, "It's unethical, and I won't do it. You can do whatever you want, but you better not put my name on it, and I am going to call the client and tell him that we don't have anything that will work." The little idiot stomped out, and my boss was mostly amused. Story 4. I was trying out every job that was hiring in an effort to find myself way back when. I spent exact 3 days as a senior carer. First day was training. Second day, I was sized up by the supervisor to see if I was cool. Third day, I was instructed to steal things from the clients' homes. Quit on the spot. They were shocked. They thought I seemed like exactly the kind of guy who would want to burglarize the elderly. That was a wake-up call in and of itself. I reported them. Nothing came of it. 5 or so years later, they were shut down for misusing clients' payment information. Story 5. While working on a scrapyard, I found police evidence in the scrap. Was asked to outright ignore it. Did so for 24 hours before I came across a disc that contained the interrogation of a girl. Disc made only 2 years before. Went silent, collected as many discs as I could spot, and turned them in after work. There was a raid the next morning. Story 6. I worked maintenance, a plastic molding company. We had a grinder that would destroy plastic chunks, turning them into tiny pieces. Well, the hopper, where the plastic is added, has a huge sign on it saying, "Don't lean in," right on the front near the opening. There was a request from a worker asking for padding because he would hurt his stomach when he leaned in. When I told him I was not going to do it, he glared at me, telling me, "Sometimes you just have to get over yourself and do what you're told." When I put my 2 weeks in, the plant manager asked my reasons. I mentioned that as one of them. PM told me he and the safety manager told the maintenance manager that was not to be done. The manager was fired in the middle of my 2 weeks. On a positive note, I was asked to list off the reasons why I quit in the legal hearing when the manager sued the plastics company for wrongful termination. Advice for everyone. Take notes of the bad things they do and keep dates. Story 7. I worked for a total ass of a manager for 2 years before his disastrous decisions finally caused an implosion. During that time, I was instructed to fire people simply because he didn't like them. I fought back and saved their jobs in all but one case. In that one case, he overrode me and fired the guy without telling me. He verbally berated me in front of 5 coworkers because I raised a major safety concern that could have hit 2 people. I got verbally berated again and threatened to be relieved of my job because I filed an accident report for an employee who was severely injured. Without that report, his workers' comp would have been denied and his medical bills would have been on him. I was told to force my employees to work a minimum of 55 HR weeks, and my boss would show up on weekends just to make sure the department was fully staffed, Saturdays and Sundays. I was working 7 days a week at the time. I started a rotating schedule so people could have time off to avoid burning out. Very technical and difficult work. When he found out I was doing this, he overrode me and made a mandate that people would be in the office at least 6 days a week. I was instructed that I would be taking on projects after hours since we had no bandwidth, and to put someone else's name on the project and not report my hours at all, salary anyways. I did this for 2 months and then said, screw this, and corrected it. HR got involved and wrote me up for it. We had lots of VOCs and other chemicals that needed to be stored in a safe manner. Instead of putting in explosion-proof cabinets and proper ventilation, we were instructed to move them outside and throw a tarp over them until audits were completed. He would call me at 9 p.m. and instruct me to force approvals on proposals going to customers without letting me see the data. He would often chop budgets down to undercut competitors, regardless of whether or not it was feasible. Almost every one of these was a financial disaster. I got blamed, but thankfully had proof. He kicked me out of a project that he hatched out of his ass that had the potential to ruin the company and delay a Fortune 500 company. I even told the customer that the idea would never work because the technology didn't exist yet. My boss was feeding them science fiction. He told me to stay put out or he'd fire me. I sent one last red flag email to the executive team, got ignored, and the company was sued for 8 figures within a year. I warned them. He and I drove to a customer's facility to meet with them on a disaster of a project that he created. We had a game plan, and he spun 180 and blamed me for everything in front of the customer. On the way back, I confronted him on it. He said, "It's for optics, just run with it." He then pulled all resources from that project and told the customer it was my decision. I was forced to meet with the president of said company and was screamed at for 45 minutes. While I was in the hospital with my wife, who almost passed in a massive car accident, my boss called me continually despite me ignoring the calls. He sent emails, even sent someone to the hospital to hand me their phone to force me to talk to him. He demanded that I work from the hospital. I told him off. My phone rang. Different number. I stepped aside and answered it, thinking it may have to do with the accident. Nope. A hole told a customer to have a conference call with me, so it was the entire customer team. I explained my situation and that my boss knew, and that it was an inappropriate time to schedule a meeting with me. The customer was awesome about it and even sent me a heartfelt email later. When I realized this boss and I were mortal enemies, I started digging into his financials in the company system. I discovered he was committing fraud and abusing the hell out of company resources. I raised it to someone I trusted and was later told, "Dude, good luck with this info. They don't want to hear it. You're shaking trees you don't want to be shaking." That boss got fired around the time of the lawsuit, and I was demoted and kicked out of my own department. The people that came in next during a reorg weren't quite a bad, but were still unethical, so I quit. I could go on and on and on. If you ever encounter unethical dealings in a company, recognize that it will not get better overnight, if at all. Once a culture allows for this type of behavior, it takes a massive effort to change it, and it rarely happens. Time to move on. Wish I had earlier before it took a toll on me. No, I will not divulge who the company is. They have gone after whistleblowers hard before. Story 8. I wrote a script to notify managers via email at the start of every shift when an employee of theirs was out of date on their training, safety, hazmat, protocol, etc. After about a week, the collective group of managers wanted me to turn it off because they were getting too many notifications. The notifications that their employees shouldn't be working because their training expired. Story 9. I worked for a car rental company, and they wanted us to only impress the credit card on the third last copy of the contract. I felt that it would be unethical and illegal to not make it clear to the customer that they were guaranteeing the payment with their credit card. They could pay cash at the end, no problem. But the credit card was used to ensure that we get the vehicle back. I think that they thought the customer would balk at using their credit cards for security. It was not a real issue at all. We rent out brand new vehicles. They use their credit card as security. The customer knew that and was fine with it. I worked in a small satellite office, so I basically just did what I felt was right and legal. The customer was informed and no one even hesitated. One day there was a big issue with a customer not wanting to pay. For BS reasons, they just felt that it was too expensive and didn't pay. The boss right away went to his lawyer to see what his options were. He told his lawyer that they only impressed the third copy, and the lawyer told him that what we were doing was illegal, and the customer would likely win in court. The boss came back to the office and took a look at the contract, and lo, and behold, it was one of my contracts. The contract had been impressed on all 3 copies, so the customer lost in court and had to pay all the expenses, including legal fees. The boss did not thank me or ever mention it to me. I was not surprised. Story 10. Worked at a little drive-through coffee stand. Boss was incredibly cheap, wanted me to use about half the grounds necessary to pull a good shot. If a cup fell on the floor, I was supposed to rinse it and use it anyway. I did not. That kind of thing. The building itself was also a literal death trap. The fire marshal came out for an inspection one day and straight up said they hoped I wasn't inside when it caught fire. The electrical system was overloaded and the appliances were all situated between the main workspace and the door. Thankfully, the drive-up window wasn't too high, so I probably could have jumped if needed be. The nail in the coffin, though, was that they wanted to bring by stock at the very end of my shift and expected me to clock out before putting it away if they were late. I refused, so I'd constantly be harassed about how they were poor small business owners. And I needed to understand they weren't poor by any means. I eventually found a better job and quit, but they told all my former coworkers they'd fired me for stealing. Story 11. Worked in child welfare. Had just removed a sibling group of 4 where the siblings were separated and had to place them in emergency foster care while we pushed relatives through for potential placement. Naturally, as is so often the case, the kids had to split up from each other, which naturally the older kids were very upset. Finally managed to convince one of the kids' new foster parents to take one of the older kids in so siblings could be together, and was told by my supervisor and our department head that I couldn't do that. Never mind that they were siblings and we were trained to do everything we could to keep siblings together. Never mind that these kids were sobbing every day, wanting to be together. None of that mattered, because the kids were ducking numbers, statistics on the monthly stat reports, and having them move would look bad number-wise. And no, couldn't have that. I was so pissed, and that ducking broke me. Don't tell me a kid who's calling me several times a day sobbing for their siblings a goddamn number. If I can give them some comfort, if I can keep siblings together, then why the hell shouldn't I? If this is what I was trained to do and the number one priority when kids are removed from their homes, then I have an ethical duty to keep siblings together, but no, because of numbers. Yeah, still bugs me and still hold a grudge against that supervisor. Although, that's for more reasons than just this incident. Story 12. I was asked to cut off a doctor from getting new clients in an effort to get them to quit, while at the same time lying to them about why they weren't getting new clients. I was asked to do this twice with 2 different doctors. Before I left, I told the doctor in question, the other one had already quit, what I had been told to do. It didn't go well for them. Seriously, just grow up and fire people you don't like. Don't do this. Story 13. I was asked to sign off on a plan to immediately start receiving, storing, and using huge quantities of an extremely volatile chemical without any of the necessary infrastructure or procedures to do so even remotely safely. It would have almost literally been a ticking time bomb. It was also all for a new product they wanted to get into the market ASAP, which they'd skipped 95% of the design control process for and mostly bypassed both the quality and regulatory departments on. When I was pulled into a meeting with upper management about it, I told them that if they were going to actually consider this, then I needed to quit effective immediately to avoid implicating myself in what they were doing. Oddly, they suddenly started taking my concerns very seriously after I said that. Rather than overtly evil, they ended up simply being a terrifyingly dangerous combination of ignorant, eager, optimistic, and overconfident in their own knowledge. Story 14. I don't know if it technically falls in the guidelines here, but this was a poor situation I was involved in. A number of years ago, I was a shift supervisor for a certain coffee chain that you can assume is located on every corner. I had a great team and was in line for promotion, so I transferred stores for more experience. The cafe I moved to was located near a popular public transit station, so our customers were of the seedier variety. We were having a lot of safety trainings as a company, and my little team was having ours on this particular day. Now, I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I was the most experienced in my supervisor team. The 3 others with me were inexperienced and would cry wolf on various things they felt slighted for, being ignored, being treated unfairly, which in hindsight was true. I was just better at putting up with it. Our manager was brand new, and her manager was a master manipulator, and I'm so glad I don't work for him anymore. So, anywho, we're having our safety meeting. Us 4 supervisors are facing out the store windows. The store and district managers are sitting facing us with their backs to the windows. They're telling us about handling belligerent customers, illegal activity within the store, how to report and promote safety. They ask us if we've ever experienced these things. And as they ask, a man and woman sit outside behind them. They just sit at an outdoor table. Another man pulls up and approaches them. The new guy comes in and buys her a drink, and the 3 chat for a moment. Then, this woman leaves in the car with the new man, while the original guy just waits. There are details I'm forgetting or missing, but all 4 of us were very aware that this was escort. We're very aware this guy waiting is a pimp, and this woman left with a client. Overall, no judgment from me, but it's not a safe practice, and you can't do that in this coffee shop. So we respond, yes, something illegal is happening right now, and explain what we've witnessed. We were all told not to worry about it. We're having a meeting, and we need to stay on focus. Needless to say, this district manager also made me believe that after 4 years getting a pay raise to the same rate as the brand new girl was fair, because the whole company got raises in an effort to reach the $15 minimum wage. and I was told I would promote faster if I put in a little more effort, implying that I didn't try hard enough because I showed up to work with hair and teeth brushed instead of a full face of makeup. My now husband followed the same grooming standards within the company and received his promotion before ultimately leaving the company as well. So yeah, safety meetings are important and cannot be disturbed in the event of actual safety concern. Also, this store manager had me clean up a used needle with a broom and dustpan, then into a paper bag stapled shut and put into the dumpster, since having the sharps container removed was too much of a hassle. Don't drink coffee from that crap show. Story 15. Oh, I shouldn't, but okay. Lie by omission and not tell anyone that I figured out what medical error hit the patient. It happened multiple times. Several if you want to add in abusive behavior of staff and just injured the patient to it. My interest in making sure everyone knew about it was twofold. Saving the patient if we could. If you knew the exact medical mistake, you maybe give an antidote or ride something out or counteract the error in some other way that would help the patient pull through. Secondly, I wanted to make sure it didn't happen again. I wanted the person who made the error to know exactly what they did wrong so they could correct their actions however they needed to do it so that they never did that again. Everybody always gets mad at the QA person. Look, I am not tattling. I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble. It's about where in the process did we have a breakdown? And is that an area that needs tightened up, or was the individual the variable? It's about fixing things, building safeguards, not discipline. Great example. I ran to the ICU where the patient had been transferred to tell the resident that the patient got a dose of vitamin K meant for another patient before she arrested. I was just told not to say that too loud. When I told my boss, I figured out what happened, who made the error, and that it was Bob. But Bob was doing way too much by passing meds for the whole floor that day. We never did that. And it was Bob's first day back after a couple of months off after he buried his son, who passed in a car accident. Yes, it would have destroyed Bob to know that. Bob didn't need to know. Bob did need to say no if assigned to pass medications to the whole floor again, though. And the charge nurses needed to not assign anyone to meds for that many patients at a time. But what do I know? I'm only performance improvement, risk management. Oh, and hey, let's not put patients with last names like Walters and Walther in rooms 12 and 13, which are right next to each other and get mixed up all the time anyway. Concept. Yeah, I found medical mistakes all the time and was always being told to keep quiet about them. I made sure to tell the doctor, but afterwards stopped there unless the doctor wanted me to say something to anyone else. Reason number 108, that I don't nurse anymore. And knowing all that crap and having it eat away at you all the time, and you weren't able to get anyone to want to do anything about it, that was reason number 109, how ducked in the head that made me. Story 16. I was an IT consultant, on-site full-time, at a building that had 5 clients. One was my main account and made up about 4% of the company's entire revenue. So the owner of the account needed a new laptop. But a few weeks prior, they had purchased some EAT equipment from a major supplier, not through my boss, so he couldn't get his 5% on it because they needed it rapidly for a quickly turned-up construction project. When I went to the owner of the consulting firm with the usual PO process and procurement, he sends back the invoice, and it's jacked up 40% over the MSRP of the device from what I saw on our purchasing portal. I emailed him, you know, this is 40% over MSRP for the owner's laptop, right? Him, yeah. They went through CDW on the last purchase they made, and I didn't get the sale, so duck them. Me, you sure you want to do this? Him, yep, present the invoice. Me, okay. My direct supervisor, who had quit a few months prior, told me always take care of the client account first, because those are the people who will provide you references. I took that advice, went to the owner of the account and told him what my boss was trying to do, and recommended he get it from CDW without me in the loop and told him how to do it. Basically, I did it all. He gave me his CE. A few weeks later, boss asks me what happened with the laptop purchase. I told him that the account wanted to use CDW going forward. About 18 months later, the account approached my boss and bought me from them. I spent 14 great years with them. Lesson, always take care of people and do the right thing. Story 17. There's a listening device in my mom's break room at her job. She works in a nursing home. So figured it out by talking about certain things like problems she'd have with other staff or say certain things in that room to test the boss. One day, she talked about how they should cook more snickerdoodles for the residents there. The next night, it was on the bill that they make snickerdoodles. Once her coworker went in that room and cursed up a storm. The next day, the worker was in trouble for swearing too much around the residents, he asked my mom. Where did this come from? I never swear around the resident. My mom said, it's from that day you were in the break room cursing up a storm. After that, she is 100% sure there's something in there and the boss is listening to everything they say. Weird. Story 18. I was working as a claims processor for a small medical practice. Usually, if an account was overdue, I needed to inform the patient to pay up or services would cease until paid up. or send them to collection. Nothing special so far, as some privately owned practices, especially as a non-urgent facility, can do this. For context, my first month out of 2 was draining as I went through all of the accounts from the past 6 months to find any errors. There was dozens, and I constantly felt like I was putting out fires from well before my time. Issues with no prior authorization, bad accounting, rejected claims due to missing CPT ICD-10 codes. Out of maybe 40 patients the practice had, I'd say a good 30% were being charged more because we weren't doing our diligence with insurance payments. In any event, we had one specific client that's kind of a big deal, known locally and nationally, who was a financial lawyer that was going through a bitter divorce. Their child was receiving services through our office. Because of how accounts were managed separately based on insurance, there was a snafu at one point in where one of dad's payments was processed for mom's, and part of mom's payments were processed as dad's. This left an overdue balance forward of something small, like 50. This patient was coming in 3x a week, paying every 2 weeks consistently for appointments that cost $120 a pop or $360 a week. She called up one day to make a $300 payment, and I let them know I was still investigating their account to make sure the appropriate individual would pay the balance forward before presenting it. That same day, I processed the last week's charges, bringing their account back up another $360. My boss called and asked what the balance was. I told her and mentioned the payment that day and that all the charges were newly entered. She told me to cancel all forwarding appointments and to inform the client it was a crap show. 2 weeks of back and forth, bitter emails, and I was constantly told, do not let them schedule any payments. Flash forward about a week and we get a nice legal letter suing us for misdiagnosing the child. Turns out my micromanager from hell ignored key elements of the child's diagnosis that prevented insurance from being able to be processed, as it was seen as elective and not necessary. We owed the family close to 4 weeks of sessions worth, close to about $1,500. I don't know the whole aftermath, as I quit the following week. Story 19. Send spam SMS 3x in the same hour. Me. But this will annoy anyone who receives it, boss. Well, that's good. If they're annoyed, they will check our website out. How the duck did you come up with that conclusion? Story 20. Kill the flies beetles on the salad using a CO2 fire extinguisher. When I suggested we wash the salad instead, the manager looked horrified. His way was much quicker. Story 21. We had an activist investor come along and buy majority share in our 30-plus years running international restaurant brand. He had the entire company doing unethical crap, like constantly. We were having company meetings while our decades-long CEO would run through all the things we weren't supposed to do, even if it was suddenly a company initiative. It completely tanked the brand and led us to eventually being sold to a capital group who merged with us. Not like any of the customers, vendors, employees, or management even had a say at that point. Some examples: firing long-standing employees, get direction to snub them in future careers and not be a reference. Not paying large capital invoices because it would make our stock look bad. Forced removal and addition of board members who had no stake in the business. Influencing trading through these new agents. Ignoring food and service safety guidelines to save money while publicly witch-hunting and doxing management who was forced to make the choice. Forcing employees to quit. Stating the system changed when they got their promotion, so they lost all seniority, extra PTO, and then were expected to be grateful when the promotion you got make you go from VP to a specialist. Firing and rehiring employees who worked there too long without telling them to affect their benefits. Stock bonuses were our only bonuses. They fired anyone $1 6 months before it matured and could be traded. People lost bonuses. They were waiting to mature for 3+ years, only to get absolutely nothing. Story 22. Was guilted into working overtime every damn day, eventually burning myself out. Then being written up because I needed a break and they refused my request. I stayed with that company for 10 years and was too young and naive to stand up for myself. They also took an hour out of our paycheck for lunch daily, even if we were forced to work through it. Some shady crap. Story 23. Not me, but a company that often works in tandem with mine wasn't paying their staff for time spent driving between jobs. Bear in mind, this is in London, so traffic is often chaotic. And I've personally spent more time driving at work than actually working many times. The messed up thing, though, is none of the staff realized that this was highly illegal, and some of them had worked for that company for years. It wasn't uncommon for employees to only work for 2 to 3 hours a day due to traffic. When I told them how illegal that practice was, they were shocked. I know a group of them went to talk with their boss about it, and he pleaded ignorance. No idea how, as the company is fairly large, and offered to pay them X amount in compensation and to change the business practice. One of his staff who'd worked there For years, only received $3,000, but he was stupidly over the moon with it. He was entitled to tens of thousands of pounds in backdated pay, but said he couldn't be asked. Story 24. We got a new flagpole that they wanted installed on the roof near the pool deck of a 15-story hotel. When it arrived, my boss, half joking, half serious, said it was my job to figure out how to get it up to the roof. It would not fit in the elevator. So my next idea was through the laundry chute of the building. While examining it and almost getting taken out by a bag of laundry, I realized I could fit it on the ground floor, but getting it out of the chute would have been impossible. The only way was to take several hundred feet of rope we had and manually haul it up. Side story. I went to the roof after tying a noose to see if it would be long enough. As I got on the elevator, a woman joined me. She side-eyed me several times as I was examining the noose and testing it to make sure it was tight and wouldn't come apart. I get to the roof and didn't realize the lady had gotten off with me. I throw the rope over the side and watch it hit the ground and said, "Duck yes," under my breath. She went straight to HR and said that one of their employees, me, was hanging a noose out of the side of the building and feared that I was going to hang myself. That was an awkward meeting. Back to the story. The meat of this story is basically I was manually hauling a 40-foot flagpole to the top of a building using rope, and the spot I chose was over our indoor dining area where people were enjoying their meals. My gut still drops, even though it didn't happen, at the thought of having the pole halfway up and it is slipping out of the noose, impaling someone down in the dining area. Looking back now, I realize how dangerous and stupid it was. But the good news is there's a really nice flag flying atop the Warwick Hotel in Denver. Story 25. I worked for a fireworks company for a summer with loads of violations. First, we were handing out fire extinguishers to our vendors who sell at various temporary locations, and most, if not all, were expired and had no pressure left. I brought this up to my boss thinking I was being helpful, and he just looked at me and told me to get it done faster. Then, later that season, they asked me to move product around the warehouse and stack some items on a forklift, which I was not only never trained and certified on, but I didn't feel comfortable, so I said no. At that point, he basically forced me into the forklift and showed me how it works, way too fast to get anything out of the lesson. Along with the forklift fun, we were stacking items that far exceeded the limits for flammable items in a non-air-conditioned building in the summer. To top it all off, I was asked last minute to pack up my stuff and drive to Idaho, from Utah, to pick up leftover fireworks from various grocery stores and vendors across multiple days. My boss said that he called them all to see how much was left, but that clearly wasn't true because at each location they had 2-3 times as many fireworks as I was told, and by the end of it all, I had so many fireworks I legally needed a CDL to transport them all. At one point near the end of the process, I was pulled over for speeding. That was on me. And the officer noticed the flammable label and said, "I'll be right back. I gotta check the laws on that," which sent my heart absolutely racing, because I knew I had too many. Thankfully, the officer didn't say anything about it in the end, and I went on my way without even a speeding ticket. After that season, I told them I'm never coming back and have since gotten my first job in healthcare, which has been amazing. Story 26. When opening a restaurant many years ago, we had a ton of applicants that couldn't provide required legal documents, social security card, state ID, passport, etc. Sadly, this was extremely common for this location. One person interviewed great, had some leadership qualities, but when I reviewed his documents, I quickly determined that they were obviously fake. I make the required internal notes and let him know that I couldn't hire him and left it at that. He had already made small talk with me and my boss, who was also interviewing people, and he proceeded to call my boss repeatedly over the next few weeks. Fast forward, we were having a lot of trouble getting qualified and legal applicants, and my boss informed me that I would be hiring this individual. I voiced my dissent, cited my evidence, and refused. He kept pushing, and eventually I told him that if he felt that the paperwork was sufficient, which he hadn't reviewed at all, then he could hire this person and assign them to my store, and that I would be informing our core HR team. Surprise, surprise, this person was hired and started a week later. I notified my HR team, who notified me that they had made the decision, but they also admitted that they hadn't performed appropriate review of the documents. My boss was terminated for unspecified reasons about 60 days later. I worked there for another 6-7 months after that and left. Maybe 90 days after I left, the Department of Immigration showed up at the restaurant looking for this guy. He got spooked and ran out the back door and was found about an hour later hiding in a dumpster. Turns out, he had a pretty lengthy criminal record in his home country. Wow, walking from my home to the restaurant, I would pass a good half dozen or so signs posted in people's front yards that held messages like, "Get your social security card here, $10 ASAP," or "Passports by tomorrow." I liked my job until I got to that location. Story 27. Fortunately, I wasn't dumb, so I refused. But I had worked for a bakery for 5 years before receiving a better offer at competing bake shop. I was polite and gave them 2 weeks' notice. They turned around and told me I wouldn't receive my last 2 paychecks until I signed an NDA. I didn't say a word in return, just calmly walked out and went straight to the Department of Labor. Sent them an official form notifying them that what they were doing was extortion. It was a Class 4 felony, and they had 2 weeks to send me my paychecks or I would see them in court. They complied within 3 days. Story 28. 4 years ago, I worked at a quick lube shop, like a Jiffy Lube, but a smaller regional chain. The upper management was very stingy with their money. Any building maintenance was put in the hands of minors or people in their very early 20s who were paid federal minimum wage or just slightly above. If you've gone to any mechanic shop, there is a good chance you've likely seen the giant rolling glass shop doors. Well, our shop was built in the early 80s, and most of the building was the original hardware, meaning after 30-something years of these electric doors opening and closing, most of the springs broke. They would be manually operated by a rope, and someone with decent enough strength to yank the rope so that the door would open and close. Well, we would have one door. That was electric, but crapped out at least once every other month. Management would make store employees get an oily, slippery 20-foot-long extension ladder, prop it to the railing of the slider door on the ceiling, and fix a rope to it to pull it down. The ladder was not secure. It would often bow in the middle. Each step was so oily that it was a gamble, often asking yourself, am I going to slip and fall onto a tile floor from about 20 feet in the air, or will I cling on? Keep in mind, none of the employees had no training or certification in commercial door repair, and I'm fairly certain OSHA mandates a harness system if you are at a height of more than 8 feet up. It got so bad that me and 2 other employees, we called ourselves the back nun, consulted workplace lawyers in our final months at this shop. They usually elected me to this duty because I was the skinniest, as if that made much of a difference. Story 29. So my first job was at this restaurant that was connected to this gas station and owned by the same company as the station. So we would make food for the gas station's hot case as well as the restaurant. We had these fried chicken tenders we made fresh to order and for the case, and we battered them ourselves, so the chicken we used was unfrozen and came in big bags. I worked the close and was basically the unofficial shift leader. So when I worked, there would usually be no manager in the restaurant, but there would be one at the gas station I could go to for help. One day we just got an order in and the chicken smelled really bad, so I showed the gas station manager and they basically said, yeah, that's gross. If you don't feel comfortable selling it, don't. So I didn't put all the chicken away with a note explaining what was going on. The next day I see that they were making chicken again, and I do see my manager and ask if they saw my note, and they tell me that there was nothing wrong with the chicken they used so far. Well, later I'm going to make chicken, and I notice it smells foul again and again. We stop making it and write another note. In the end, I got a stern talking to about the note, because it was pretty creatively worded because I was annoyed that this gross chicken was being sold and that the day shift people were okay with it. This all goes on for a couple more days, and I keep refusing to serve the gross chicken until a regional manager for the company comes in to check on things, and when I show her this chicken and explain everything, she ends up having us toss it all. And later we had a team meeting about the whole situation. Story 30. I used to work in international undergraduate admissions and recruiting at a large public university in the US. The administration wanted to increase international enrollment. Great! Education is a wonderful thing. As we all know, it's also ridiculously expensive in the US. The best way to make it more affordable is to offer the in-state resident tuition rate. It cuts a student's annual tuition and fee bill in about half. If a student is awarded a competitive scholarship of a certain amount or more for the academic year, they get the in-state rate. So they decided the best thing to do was give out one-time competitive scholarships at the minimum amount to all international undergraduate applicants who met the minimum freshman admission requirements but didn't qualify for any other scholarships. The problem was, the specific intention of these scholarships was to rope the students in at the in-state resident rate for the first year, leaving them on the hook for the full non-resident bill for the rest of their undergraduate degree. It was almost impossible for these students to get a similar scholarship at our university for their remaining time until graduation, but we had to upsell that possibility nonetheless. The worst of it was when we'd be gathering the proof of funding they needed to show for their student visa application, selling this dream of an education and encouraging people to empty various relatives' savings accounts just to cover the cost of the first year at the in-state rate. It happened pretty much every day. We weren't supposed to go into worry about how they were going to pay for the next 3 years until graduation. That's a retention issue. We need to get those sweet admission to enrollment conversion numbers. I got into the field because I wanted to help people get an education, not bankrupt their extended families. Story 31. I worked with wayward youths in a residential setting at a US government facility. One youth was prescribed a substance for ADHD. The first few times he took the dose, he was speeding out of his mind. They called the doctor and told the doc a lower dose was needed. They then told me the doctor had said to split the capsule open, dump the contents on a dinner plate, and take a card and split the tiny amount of powder in 2 piles. One pile was to be put into his orange juice, and the other pile was to be dumped into a sandwich baggie for the next day. They even described how to pinch off the corner of the baggie and put a twist tie on it, like they did with CK back in the 80s. I typed up a letter refusing and stating that splitting the powder into 2 amounts constitutes formulation. Putting it in his OJ constitutes formulation as well. I am not a pharmacist. They insisted it was okay because the doctor ordered it. I asked to see the order. They got aggressive about it. I then stated I'd call the doctor, then call the attorney general if I heard another word about it. Story 32. I worked at a popular technology store that comes out with new smartphones about once a year, and there are often lines of people waiting to buy the new phone. The issue was that a family of resellers would buy all of the phones that were shipped to our store and sell them overseas to countries where the smartphone hadn't been released. This was their family business, and they only worked during new smartphone season. It was extremely profitable for them, well over $1 per year. So this was the issue. This family would buy all of our phones, 10 at a time per person. Dad got 10, mom got 10, teenager got 10, baby got 10. Wait, what? Yes, I was selling bags of smartphones to infants, and then the whole family would get back in line and do it again, multiple times a day. The part that made it seem insane to me was that regular customers would wait in line too and ask if we had such and such smartphones available, and I had to look them in the face and say, no, customer, but I just saw you give that family 7 bags of them. Me, yeah, I'm sorry. We don't have any others available for you to purchase today. Please try again tomorrow. Management knew they were fudging sales numbers. They knew they were screwing over regular customers. They knew it was ridiculous to sell bags of smartphones to babies. When I brought it up that I could no longer lie to people about our inventory, it was suggested that I take a medical leave for anxiety. I don't work there anymore. It's been about 5 to 6 years. This scheme still happens every time a new smartphone comes out. Story 33. Lie to construction inspectors all the time. I finally explained to him, here's a set of blueprints. I'm going to do the job according to the blueprints. Then I'm going to show the blueprints to the inspector and then show him what I did and that it was according to the prints. It's a simple concept that my boss can't seem to understand. It's a game to him. He enjoys getting one over on inspectors. Story 34. I work in a hospital fixing surgical equipment, x-ray machines. I had a manager a few years back that wanted to save money by skipping maintenance on the machine that supplies fresh oxygen to your body while your heart is disconnected during open heart surgery, heart and lung machine. We had already had a few failures with another older model, but I was able to keep things going to at least get through the surgery. I objected to my manager and wound up getting some of our back and forth on email. Then I reported it to surgery and hospital staff. I was threatened with being fired multiple times, but they needed me to keep their very old machines up and running. They had tried to suspend me a year previous, but things worked out very poorly when they realized none else knew how to keep surgery running. Plus, I had a second gig as a bartender at the time, which made at least as much money as my day job, so I stuck to my guns. Upper management was called in from the third party I worked for, but I refused to talk to them until one day I showed up and had a work order for the machine's manufacturer for the required work to be completed. There were other issues with that manager-employer like overtime wages missing, money for repairs disappearing, etc. So I left as soon as I could, but both my former supervisor and manager were eventually fired when hospital management got sick of their shenanigans. When the company I worked for eventually had their maintenance contract renewed, the hospital put in writing that the manager wasn't allowed on hospital property anymore. Story 35. I only worked at a local small chain donut shop for 2 months before I decided I could not morally serve food to people or work there anymore. When I first started, I was already mad because my friend that had referred me didn't mention that they didn't have AC in the kitchen. Okay, whatever, got over it. This place is in the historic part of town, and the pipes hadn't been changed since the building was first put in somewhere around 1880. I don't know how they lasted that long, to be honest. The water was awful quality, and we were even told not to drink it. They told us we could have 1 free water out of our 8-10-hour shift in 90-degree weather, which was even hotter because the fryers were running. We had a change in management, and they had no idea how to actually run a place. This person was the regional manager, and to try to cut down costs, he decided to let half the staff go, while also saying that we could complete our work in half the time with half the people. This also involved the management not fulfilling shipping orders from our store. They just decided that the plastic covers to keep bugs out of everything wasn't necessary anymore. Also, the back door had broken and it wouldn't lock anymore. The regional manager decided that it wasn't worth fixing it. I worked the night shift by myself on a busy bar street on the weekend. I did that for 1 weekend, and told my boss that I couldn't serve people food that had bugs in it or risk my safety every time I came in. Story 36. I worked at an HVAC plumbing company that tried to appear wholesome, American flags veteran discounts, but they were shady AF. Was instructed to book a service call even if they don't service the item, like a dishwasher. That way the tech can charge the customer $99 to tell them they need to call someone else. The maintenance plan was $20 more expensive if you paid annually. They told customers that it's the manpower required to process the payment. No, they just wanted you on hard-to-cancel monthly automatic payment. They counted on people forgetting they had signed up. They made it hard for customers to cancel the maintenance plan. Cancellation must be in writing and signed by the account holder. It cannot be faxed or emailed. But then, it takes 2 weeks to process, during which they were able to bilk another month's payment because the letter had to be processed, not received, 30 days before your next billing cycle. I did time cards. I was instructed to remove 60 minutes for lunch regardless if it was taken or not. I was also instructed to change any OT to regular pay. I never did any of that because it's illegal. They equated higher labor costs with more customers they never found out. I briefly worked at a craft store while in college. On my second night of training, my coworker showed me where the trash compactor was. She showed me how to put stuff in and then told me to stand on a stool, crawl in and push the stuff down the chute. I declined. There's a large sign right next to it that says, "Don't climb in." Story 37. My first ever job as a teen was at a small fish and chip shop. There was a bit of cod that was getting a bit smelly, so my boss threw it in the bin. A couple of hours later, after the evening rush, I was washing up at the sink next to said bin. My boss came out, reached in the bin and dug out the cod. He rinsed it very sparingly under the tap I had running, before going out and dipping it in batter and serving it to a customer. I was a very timid 16-year-old at the time, and I asked him why he would sell that. He just shrugged and said, "We didn't have any other medium cod." The shift after that, I was making the pea fritter mix ready to be battered. We used to use an ice cream scoop to get the mushy peas into a ball shape. I accidentally dropped a whole scoop on the sticky floor, and he told me to pick it up and squish it back into a ball. No. I left the next week and went to work in a shop. Story 38. I had a manager that loved being involved in people's personal lives. One of the girls I worked with was having some issues with her husband, and my manager was set on snooping through her work email and chat. The girl and I were at lunch one day, and our manager calls her and says she needs her password to her computer to get something for a client. I tell her to say no and let her know we would be back in 5. When we get back, my manager calls a staff meeting and tells us that we have until the end of the day to provide her with our passwords. I stopped her and told her, no, that's not how this works. They are unique identifiers, and if you log on my account and look at adult film, I'm liable. I also went to the head of it and told him that she was requesting passwords. The next day, an email came out saying, you need access to an employee's computer. You must talk to the general manager, and he will work with it to reset the password so you can gain access. And your access to the computer would be monitored by the general manager. And it shut that crap right down. There was also no practice for terminating access to one of our off-site locations where HIPAA was stored. After I quit a month later, I was talking about the job and got curious about my access. I was still able to log into the system. I let it know and corrected it. Story 39. Had me steal code from a business partner of my boss. When I had just started at this software company, the guy I was hired to assist refused to talk to me at all. Soon thereafter, the company system started breaking in ways only said guy could solve, and the rest of us didn't have the skills to solve, according to him. My first real task doing was to fix some bugs. The codebase was only accessible to said guy, so in essence, I had to steal the code through vulnerabilities on his server, reverse engineer it, and reconfigure it to run on a new server. The guy was let go soon after I could demonstrate I could set up a new working server with the apps running on it. I also wrote lots of smaller tools to help the other employees manage the system. The following months, I managed to puzzle some pieces together. The idiot wasn't an employee per se, but a business partner, freelancer, that hadn't been paid by his agreement with my boss. At first, I didn't feel that bad because the idiot behavior put everybody, boss, coworkers, customers, in a hard spot. But I soon realized my boss's view of money's worth and what is important in software development was all ducked up. I noped out as quickly as I could, which took far too long. As much as I feel bad for stealing the code, I feel schadenfreude for demonstrating to the idiot that I did have the skills to work with the mess he had created. Story 40. I work at a Fred Meyer. We had a massive rat infestation, like hundreds and hundreds. We were told to clear out tens of rats' nests and dead rats at varying levels of decay, all over the grocery store. Deli, bakery, apparel, and the furniture displays under the shelving units. Your name it. Bet there was both a dead and live rat there once. No personal protective equipment, no training, No professionals, just minimum wage employees and plastic sacks full of dead rat bodies. Story 41. Damn, wish I had something blatantly illegal, but just lack of workplace safety. Cleaning up chemical spills, mostly diluted with water as it's used to clean metal, and the resulting metal comes out discolored without proper training or even explanation of what the duck kind of chemical mixture it is. Had to correct powder paint as they went on a conveyor belt with a box cutter. Nearly lost control in my thumb for that one. My cut was only 2 mm away from tendon. A huge plastic PVC pipe right in front of the 400-degree oven for powder coating that was already very much visibly distorted due to the heat that pumped the excess water out into a nearby field. That pipe breaks, anything under gets ruined, and it's right by electrical boxes too. I didn't see the fallout of that last one. I left shortly after the injury. Did cough out powder out of my lungs for basically the entire time I worked there. And I wore a N95. Had a picture on my phone of how black it was after a day, but it might have been lost in me trying to upgrade my phone. At least they were kind enough to give us graveyard shift, because during the day, we were super close to suffering from heat stroke due to the days being hot, being right beside a bunch of welders, and that 400-degree oven pushing out metal so hot it burns to the touch, mixed with no air conditioning. Yeah, story 42. The sewer system backed up and flooded through the drains in the kitchen. My boss made the kitchen staff stand in and walk through literal crap water, enough to cover the bottom half of your shoes, on a busy Friday night. We made a makeshift barricade with old towels so that it would not leak into the front of the house. Boss refused to shut down and close because he didn't want to lose business. My co-workers, besides myself and another cook, just kind of accepted it, which blew my mind. I could not stop gagging, and the other cook I mentioned had to go outside to puke 3 times. The 3rd time she went out to puke, she never came back. We ended up wearing masks pre-COVID, but it just made the whole situation worse, and with everyone running around the kitchen, the water was splashing. All of the staff, about 10 of us total, small restaurant, had to stay and clean the place after the plumber fixed the issue. I think we spent about 4 hours cleaning, and even after that, the place still reeked and felt dirty. Surprisingly, we never were reported, and/or nobody found out about the incident. No one quit either, other than the cook. I wish I had quit, but I was leaving for vacation the next day, so when I got back, I stuck it out for another month before I finally had enough. Had to throw out my shoes and pants from that night. That place closed down during the height of the pandemic. Story 43. When I worked caregiving, our clients have a required number of hours per month to be in the community called community integration. The reality was that the clients in my house were all old men who wanted to sit and watch TV. This was at first met with, just document you asked, and they refused and take someone else. Later, it became, take them out kicking and screaming. I don't care, they need to meet their CE time. There was one guy who just loved to eat ice cream at Brahms all the time. I was soon told to stop taking him there all the time and do different things, which he strongly objects to. Despite my documentation, they didn't believe me and said I was just being lazy. Story 44. Telecommunications tech here. Worked for a super sketchy company a few years back, getting my footing in the door. Was called out to a frat house, where I met, let's call him Chad. Chad told me his phone in his room wouldn't work, landline, and he needed it to be up and running at any cost. Well, go to his switch and see, nothing is open at all. So we tell him this, and he tells me that, yeah, the last tech that came here told me that the only thing he could do was remove the fire alarm line to reconnect my phone, and he said it was illegal to do so. I'm asking you to do it. Right off rip, I was like, fuck no, that a direct breach of FC codes and all sorts of other hefty violations. I looked at my supervisor and he acted as if he didn't want to do it either. So Chad says BRB comes back with $5K and a bag of Coke. Says he can trade us this instead of writing it on the books. I didn't want to do it, but my supervisor was all about that crap. I stood back and watched him do it by himself and went home with $2,500. The frat house burnt down 2 years later. Fire rescue was never notified. The university suspended all tech support for 3 days to figure out what happened. My supervisor never wrote it down on the books and never told main boss. Our event never existed until now. Story 45. My boss actively encourages us to commit fraud. It's fantastic. She hates me because I refuse, but she can't fire me because then she'd have to admit her wrongdoing. I love how uncomfortable she is whenever I talk to the owners. Story 46. I have 2 from the same job. The president of the company I worked for at the time made me apply to colleges for his son. His son went to Pepperdine and wanted to transfer but was too busy to do anything. So I not only had to do all of the work, but I even had to impersonate him on the phone because I couldn't get access to certain records I needed. I got him into 4 schools before the POs decided he was going to stay at Pepperdine. Story number 2. That same kid had a girlfriend who had an unpaid medical bill, about $10K, that was going into collections. Same president made me contest it on her behalf since she claimed it was bogus. After a full investigation, I entirely proved that not only did she get the service they were billing for, but that she lied about it so she didn't have to pay. I got her on the phone with the company president and proved it in front of them both. He just gave me his corporate card and asked me to take care of it. I have more if you all are interested. I hated that job so much. In case you're wondering, my actual job was a project manager for a for-profit education company. I have stories for days on that place. Story 47 had a manager at Village Inn, which is a Denny's competitor, that wanted to save a couple bucks on coffee. She placed an open Home Depot bucket on the floor in one of the back rooms and instructed all of us that if any customers didn't finish the coffee in the coffee pots we placed at the table, we were to pour the leftover coffee into this open bucket on the ground, and it would be served as iced coffee the next day. The bucket was also at the end of one of the prep tables back there, so every time someone went to wipe down that table or wipe off crumbs, sanitizing solution and random gunk would fall into the bucket. The only way around it was that if she found a tea bag in the bucket, she would be all sad that the bucket had been spoiled and would then throw the coffee out. So every day on my shift, I would grab a whole handful of tea bags and throw them in so she would deem it unusable. She now works as a manager at Wendy's, and I take great care to never go to her store. I could not believe she would go to such disgusting lengths to save the store the cost of literally like 1 or 2 more pots of coffee a week. Story 48. I worked in a metal machine shop that cut steel to be used for grocery store shelving. One of the OSHA rules was nobody was to lift over 50 pounds alone. Part of my job was hauling these 10-foot by 6-foot sheets of metal that weighed about 75 pounds each from the machine that cut small shapes into them to a long wooden table where I'd break the shapes out and stack them by a machine that bent them and cut screw holes into them. At several points did I get cut, stabbed, burned, and bruised hauling these heavy sheets back and forth. I learned we were supposed to use the forklift, but nobody would train me to use it, and the one employee that was trained to use it wouldn't move my steel. Most of my shirts I still own from when I worked there are full of holes or have blood stains that never came out. Whenever an OSHA inspector would come around, they'd use the forklift. At one point, I was told to pick up the pace and move 2 sheets at once. I made the attempt, and the sheets toppled over on me. I was sent to the hospital the next morning by the manager, but they found nothing wrong with me. Despite the manager saying they'd take the bill, I was stuffed with a $4K hospital bill. I was fired a few weeks later for lack of efficiency. Story 49. I got hired as a secretary for a plastic surgery office. Was told I would be answering phones, scheduling, and that's it. I had 0 medical experience and told them this. On day 1, I was handed a pair of scrubs and told that I was also going to be a scrub tech as well. I was instructed to assist the doctor in surgery. Basically, I handed in tools, held tools that were attached to the patient, etc. I almost passed out on the first day from shock. I was assured over and over again that it was legal. Whether it was legal or not, I'm not sure, but I lasted 3 months and quit as soon as I found another job. Story 50. Coincidentally, I was just telling this story earlier today. While in grad school at a major U.S. university, I was a teaching assistant for a few years. One of the labs requires to use large quantities of ethidium bromide as a buffer for gel electrophoresis. At the end of the week, we were instructed to dispose of the ethidium bromide, gallons of it, by pouring it down the sink. Ethidium bromide is a known mutagen. Story 51. My boss used to ask me to work closing on a Sunday, about 10, 11 p.m., by myself. Everyone else had the day off on Monday. I'm a high school student who has to get up at stupid o'clock for school. I have asked him to not do that, but he continues to. So I've sent him an email stating that I cannot work on Sunday closing. And if I am put on again, I will not be showing up. He got really angry, but his wife saved me from him. Story 52. Way back in time, I worked at a couple group homes for troubled kids. One of them gave me a weird taste in my mouth as soon as I walked it. I couldn't put my finger on it, though. One of the requirements for homes where residents take medications is to have everything stored in specific ways, with logs that are maintained and signed off by people with very specific and current certifications. I was a daytime staff during the week, so my job was to get the kids to school, clean during the day, pick them up, prep dinner, then go home. I was never there when meds were given, nor was I told that I was to be responsible for anything medication related. A couple weeks went by before I was asked by my boss to verify the med logs. I looked at them and they were blank. I took them to my boss and inquired as to what the hell was going on. Well, you're the only one here with the med certs, so you need to take care of it. Yeah, no. I left and immediately called the central office while driving there. When I arrived, they told me to fix the logs or be unemployed. Handed my resignation that moment, called the state as I was leaving. That organization stopped existing quickly after. Story 53. I used to work in the disputes and fraud department for a major bank. We'd get a lot of disputes where people would buy something online, use their Visa card through PayPal. As I'm sure most of you know, PayPal is ridiculously in favor of the buyer. So when the merchant would respond to the chargeback, if we responded at all, we'd win the dispute for our customer. My manager knew this, and he pressured us to take advantage of this. Even when we knew our customer was lying or knew they hadn't returned the item, etc., he'd tell us to make crap up in our, responded to the merchant, and PayPal would accept our claim and our customer would win every single time. It was so unethical that we were basically helping our customers steal things from honest sellers. As my manager would say, our job is to win the customer's money back. If the merchant wants their money, they'll have to sue the customer. At that point, it's out of our hands. And sure enough, sometimes the merchant would sue our customers. Very rarely, though. Like clockwork, our customers would call us back and ask that we help them with their lawsuit they're now facing, to which we'd respond that since it's taking place outside of the credit card system, we can't help. Story 54. I was a bike delivery driver for a sandwich shop. We delivered bikes on every 4 seasons, no matter the weather. This is in Chicago. Well, one year the polar vortex comes and it's 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Almost every office and business in our delivery area closes because they don't want people putting themselves in danger to get to work. Not us delivery bikers, though. Fine, I signed up for this. I have gear to deal with cold like this. I'll show up. When I show up, it's gotten so cold that a pipe burst in the wall of the restaurant and flooded the whole place, so they had to turn the water off. Boss says we're closed for in-shop, but delivery is still on despite almost every one of the places we deliver to being closed. Not only this, but with no running water, nobody is washing their hands before making food, and our crew of 8 bike delivery people have nothing to drink and stay hydrated with. Ironically, it's quite warm in all of that cold weather gear while riding a bike, so staying hydrated is important. Some months later, this place changed our pay structure without telling anyone, which ended up cutting our pay in half. This was when I walked off in the middle of a shift. Story 55. I have 2. One, I worked at a gluten-free restaurant that wasn't actually gluten-free. I didn't realize until a couple weeks in. When I confronted the owners, they said they were working on being gluten-free and that it wasn't a big deal. I quit. I was working for a company that wanted to advertise their products as sustainable, including no water usage. But they used humidifiers. I told them the other sustainability qualities were more than enough to easily sell it, but I couldn't say it used 0 water, because it technically did. They said I should anyway, because like the restaurant, their goal was to be water-free. They just hadn't figured out how to yet. I said that's fine, then let's just wait until it's true to say it. We already have all these great qualities to talk about. Then I found out a big percentage of their product was actually grain, not the actual product. Since the grain and the product looked similar, the company said it was fine. But grain contamination could actually wreck customers' products. So I asked them if they were trying to figure out a way to reduce the percent of grain in the final product. They said no and fired me shortly after. Restaurant's gone. Company still exists. Story 56. During my finance days, once at an insurance company as a financial advisor, and once at a bank of a private banker, me. I have spoken to the client about their goals and current financial situation, and they want to do this investment, which I agree with. Boss, it's not suitable for them. Show this insurance product instead. Why? It locks them up longer with less return, boss. It's better for the client and the bank insurance company, i.e., the client makes a bit less, but we make 4x more. Software sales. Me. Please change my territory. I'm hitting my goal in closings, but we're ripping these people off as we are set up to deliver on the expectations in this market, boss. You're a salesman. Go sell. Another software company. Media monitoring. Me. The prospect is interested, but we are missing a ton of the data they need. Boss. Stop looking for reasons the product doesn't work. The product is the best on the market and we are looking into getting the data. Me. Then, put in writing a timeline for the data so I can show the client we plan to deliver. Boss. You're a salesman. Stop giving the client reasons not to buy and convince them that the product is worth it. Story 57. I worked in a software technology company supporting a variety of communication platforms. Some ran on Linux, and some ran on Windows. I was responsible to setting up and maintaining our internal labs to run testing, etc. The company absolutely refused to pay for licensed copies of the Microsoft stuff we were using. We were told to just use the trial licenses and re-image the servers every 30 days. It was also a big enough company that there were regular audits done on the network and in person to see what was being used, where, and if it was licensed. I sent several requests for what would have been a total of $5,000 in licensing so we could get our lab up to date. I was shot down. I even pruned it down to $3,000 at one point. Still no. We were audited and the company was hit with $90,000 in fines for using unlicensed software. Mine wasn't the only lab, but it was one of the bigger ones. When they came to me, I pulled out every email chain I saved on that and told them to talk to everyone on that approval chain. When I left that team a year later, they still hadn't paid for the licensing despite several promises to get it done. Story 58. Worked as a cleaner. Years ago, during my first summer, we were doing a deep cleaning of a rock venue. Big open floor, high ceiling full of lights and ventilation. Anyway, one of the tasks was dusting all that stuff on the ceiling. The way to reach ceiling was this drive-able crane thing. A guy from the venue came to show us how the thing worked. This took an maximum half an hour, and then left us to handle things on our own. The way it worked was, you stood on a platform at the end of the crane, put a safety halter on, and used kind of a joystick to move the thing around and extended and lowered the crane when needed. Now, I'm not sure how illegal operating this particular machine without supervision or licenses, but it sure feel like it should be, thinking back on it. We could have caused massive damage to both ourselves and the venue if we'd made a single mistake when turning the thing or not stopping it in time. I mean, there were stairs to the basement in the middle of the floor, and I think they were wide enough to drive the crane down into. Story 59. The only job I ever outright quit without a notice. I was working for a smallish, growing web hosting company with a decent footprint, but the owner boss, who was also gatekeeper to some of our core systems, would routinely miss high-profile customer meetings because he still had to finish the back nine on the local golf course, which was only a quarter mile from our office, and asked me to lie to the customers about his whereabouts and/or lack of presence at the meeting. About the fourth time, I was stuck holding the bag in a scheduled call with some high-profile customers without access to the necessary systems that I could have used to address the customer's concerns and gotten things handled, and was asked to lie about his availability. I packed my desk and quit that night. That last time I didn't lie to the customers, I was outright frustrated. I told them that he was on the golf course and wasn't going to be able to make this meeting, and we're all here wasting our time. I ended that call, packed my desk, and went home for the last time. That just crossed an ethical boundary for me. Don't make me lie because you're lazy. Story 60. Worked at a now-closed cupcake shop. Owner's husband left dulce de leche out of the fridge. It molded. I was supposed to use it in cupcakes until I found it growing green fuzzies. Owner blamed me and forced me to mix it with pure Everclear and put it in the cupcakes. Watched as it was sold to a child. Reported her to the health department the next day. Got fired. Filed unemployment. But because the government shut down, she got away with it, and I got screwed. Story 61. Lie on a hazardous materials manifest. This is a federal reporting document that states the disposition of every gram of hazardous chemicals we had. We had a client renting tank space for flammable solvents. He then would fill a large tanker and deliver it to a cement kiln for use as a heat source to produce cement. We were required to measure the chlorine content. This client's content was 0, but the allowable level was 3%, so we would take his 10,000 gallons of flammables and introduce the 2% of our expensive to deal with chlorinated solvents. This saved us a ton of money and cost our client even more. And the one time I was required to lie of the federal document, I got sick and used the time off to find another gig. My manager, not the big boss, was also stealing some special steel drums and giving me a third of his profits to keep my mouth shut. Duck that heroin-infested hellhole. Story 62. At all butchers I worked at, they had me relabel almost anything B that had a short date. This was to give it a longer date. The worst one was the chicken, which would be frozen, defrosted for selling. If it didn't sell, back in the freezer it went, then back out the next day to thaw and sell, relabeled. I confronted the owner about this, and he said he didn't care. It's how he made his profit. Safe to say I quit a month later. Story 63. I work in fast food. We are supposed to measure the temperature of the food. I work at the window, and during the week when corporate was inspecting, they kept temping the food, and I was confused because we have never done that before. After corporate inspected, we stopped doing it again. I don't know if it's illegal, but it's definitely gross. They also won't allow us to talk about our wages with anyone. My boyfriend and I work the same job, and because I was hired later when they were desperate for employees, I make $1 more than him. The new hires make $5 more than us. We have brought it up, and they claim they can't do anything about it, and we shouldn't be discussing our wages. I have told them to their face that it's illegal to tell us that, and they laugh. Management shows up to work high, or they drink on the job. Coworker M goes into the women's restroom every shift and rolls his blunts. I know it's him because there's only leftover weed in the trash can after he goes in there. And no one cares because he's gay and they all smoke anyway. Story 64. We had an open position in our team. We looked through the applications, sent rejections to the ones we didn't like, and scheduled interviews for the good ones. We get a call from one of the big bosses asking us to have a look at a specific application. It was one of the rejected ones. The applicant had no relevant or meaningful experience. There was literally no reason to look into it any further. Long story short, the applicant was the child of some local political VIP who friends with the big boss, and we were basically forced to hire their kid, even though the person was totally unqualified. Story 65. I don't think illegal, but highly unethical. We would test water and soil samples for high levels of toxic contaminants. Some samples the client was pretty sure would have them, and our machines were calibrated to a certain concentration range. Anyway, when the concentration is too high above the range, it usually spits out a high, but totally incorrect number. We then dilute the sample and run that to figure out the accurate concentration. The number of times I was belittled and told to return a dilution correctly because the numbers didn't match was stupid. So like, say you dilute the sample to 1/50th of its normal concentration, and it says there is 100 ppm. You then multiply that 100 by 50 to get the real concentration undiluted, 5,000 ppm. But the machine is only calibrated for about 100, 200 maximum. So when it spits out 450 ppm for the undiluted sample, you know it's not accurate. Well, at least you should. My manager didn't get this, would yell at me, and then said, we rerun things until the numbers look nice because it's easier to explain to the client than, actual science. Story 66. My manager was sitting at a table with 10 other guys eating on their break, and he saw me and asked me what I was doing. I said, oh, nothing, I just needed to take something. Normally, managers would just go, oh, okay. But for some reason, he felt entitled enough to start harassing me for 10 minutes straight about what I took, threatening to write me up and send me home, until I snapped and shouted that it was my birth control pill. All I got was a half-assed sorry. I would have taken it to head management, but for one, I didn't trust then, and two, management at that job was so terrible that you knew that he wouldn't be reprocessed for doing that. You would. Story 67. Manager threatened a colleague that a girl from a different department that we coordinated with has filed a harassment complaint against him. The guy was shocked because he never met her, joined after the pandemic, so WF, and never talked to her outside working hours for anything other than work-related things. He went to apologize to her and clarify what happened, and the girl wasn't aware of anything. Then they both went to HR and called in the manager, and manager confessed that he was just trying to motivate him and scare him so he doesn't slack off. The girl was pissed, and HR gave him a warning. Eventually, after appraisal time, upper management raised his salary to standard 15, and then he demanded for 2025. They had a dispute, and the manager gave them a warning to accept his demand, or he would give in his 2 weeks' notice. Upper management agreed on the spot, told him today was his last day. He would be paid for the 2 weeks as stated, and he doesn't have to show up from tomorrow. Story 68. My current job requires one employee from our department to work in a different area than the rest. We're alone in a room for extended periods. Often our only interaction is with the occasional customer. I kind of like it because it's a break from the other mundane tasks we perform on repeat. However, the person put in that room often gets forgotten. All other employees take breaks and lunches whenever they are not busy. But the person in that room is required to stay on the clock and be available because customers. I worked a 7 a.m. HR shift with only one 10-minute break. I've overheard management careening about how she's capable of taking a quick break with no coverage by just taking the phone that customers call in on with her to break. Sure, that could work, and when there's literally no one to cover me, I will do that. But I shouldn't have to when there's coverage available. Yes, it's been reported to multiple different places. It has gotten slightly better since, but we shall see what the future holds. Story 69. Tax aviation. Cutting hours for hourly employees and underpay them. Messing up a payroll by paying out one employee paycheck to another on purpose and knowingly being illegal. Disregarded health and safety regulations constantly. Refusing staff to take vacations and then tell them they have their vacation time booked a few days before vacation starts, and then guilt-tripping employees into working on their vacation time, seeing they are home anyway. Never giving a heads up when manager goes on vacation, leaving one employee to do all the work. Forcing me to do 80% of the work while chilling and texting, eating, or smoking, and then having the audacity to ream me for phone usage and finding faster ways of doing my job. Paid freelancers under the table, never answering a phone call in the office without screaming into it. My contract said I had to adhere to the personnel handbook, yet I was never granted access to it, and they took every single opportunity to pull up my various infractions. BTW all is the same crafty company. Them, Story 70. I work in the operating room. Our ACs went out, which contaminated all of our surgical instruments. This was hundreds of sets. This happened on a Monday. We should have shut down for a few days to re-sterilize our instruments and have them ready. However, management declined to cancel the rest of the days and made our sterilization department sterilize everything while allowing the surgeons to operate the following day. They even allowed the surgeries from that Monday, which was our only canceled day, to be added on throughout the week, which doubled most of our days. This sounds like a good thing to people who are not familiar with the process, but one instrument set takes approximately 2 hours to be considered ready for surgery. Our central sterilization department asked for a few days to catch up and get everything ready, but we're told, we are not canceling any more days. As a result, there are several operations that were done with instruments that may or may not have been sterile at the time. Story 71. I used to work for a maid service, cleaning homes, not hotels, just in case that wasn't clear. We once had an elderly customer's son call the office and ask if the next time the cleaners were at his mom's house, could one of us give her a bath? That is not part of our job. We are not trained for that. If one of us did that and ended up getting hurt or hurting the woman, that would not be good for the company. Instead of simply telling the man, "I'm sorry, but that is not a service we offer. Perhaps you should look for a PSW." My boss tried to pressure my coworkers and I into doing it. I refused, but eventually one of my coworkers agreed and did indeed give this woman a bath the next time we were at her home. I think she did it a few times, but then we stopped going there and found out that the woman's son had moved her to a retirement nursing home. Story 72. Was told lift a mast segment that weighed in at 4 metric tons. Our overhead crane could handle 1.5 metric tons, so I refused. Boss man said, "Okay, but we have another overhead crane. Use that one as well." The second overhead crane, CP2, should support 1.5 metric tons as well. "We still got to make up for the remaining weight," I told him, so I refused again, and an argument started. "Quit your whining. We've done this dozens of times." I said, "I'm not dying for this crap job." I walked out of the workshop to have a smoke because I was pissed. A few minutes later, I hear the cranes moving. So I opened the door and some other dude was lifting the mast segment. What I saw made me glad I refused to lift the segment. Goddamn, I didn't know overhead cranes could be that flexible. I closed the door and I waited until the mast segment was on the floor again. Just in case the cranes would fail and come crashing down. Story 73. Was told to leave the scene of a car accident while I was rendering aid and the cops' M's were not there yet. I was wasting time on the clock. I stayed. Story 74. As for so many things related to H&S or lying to customers when working in contractions. Yes, sir, we put 3 layers of paint on that thing as you requested while we only did 1. Climbing up factory roofs and carrying heavy metal bars there without harness or ant security. Falling through the roof of the administrative building because no harness. Ending up on an admin desk, but having to pretend it was some things I let fall, so it was not reported as an accident. The list would be far too long, but I guess everybody in civil work or construction experienced the same. What shocked me most was my boss lying to customers all the time. Not a word was true. When moving later to the corporate world, the lying and cover-up part continues to be the most bothering part. So many critical information forgotten, not included or truly falsified. Story 75. Made me sign a document stating I'd received the training handbook before my first shift, as they handed me the training handbook on my second week of work. Not illegal, but the scissors and box cutter they used to open boxes of chips and whatnot. They also used to open bags of produce to go out on the line. No, they were never cleaned. Story 76. I worked at a plant that made chrome-plated plastic emblems and nameplates for the auto industry. Our plant was losing money, so the new plant manager saved money by having heavy metal contaminated wastewater dumped into the local water supply. We were raided by the EPA and they had guns and everything. They jumped over the counter where the receptionist worked and told us all to step away from the computer. Fun day. Story 77. Paying bribes. I mean, they're not called bribes, of course, because that would be illegal. But generally, the company I work for will protest when a local government makes some sort of large fee a requirement for us to get permits, even though those fees are illegal 9-10 times. But it's easier in the long run to just back down and pay it than it is to take them to court and delay a project by 3 years. This is a big part of why you can't afford a home, FYI. Story 78. I worked as a carer in a dementia care home. A resident had diarrhea on my shoes so badly that they needed to be put in the washing machine. I lived less than 2 minutes walk away, but they refused to let me go get clean shoes as they were dangerously understaffed. I had 5 hours left on my 14-hour shift, and I did it with no shoes on and walked out after my shift and never went back. Story 79. At my first job, my main task was pretty much to just collect shopping carts and clean the store. One thing we were required to do is notify our managers if we found any human waste, mostly fecal matter outside of toilets and needles in the parking lot. We were in a rough area. I was not allowed to handle it, and they had to be the ones to dispose of it. On several occasions, I'd find one of these things and notify my managers only for them to either ignore me or order me to take care of it myself. When I first started working, I didn't question it and would deal with it myself, but I quickly learned how big of a no-no that was. After that, whenever I found something I wasn't supposed to touch, I'd tell the store owner instead of my managers. They were a lot more serious about it when their boss is yelling at them. Story 80. Worked for a gym equipment manufacturer and got a report of a pair of J-hooks that snapped, metal hooks that hold a barbell on the rack. Tested ones out by dropping a barbell from about 20 millimeters above them and it went clean through it. Said to management that we should recall them, but got told they would only replace ones that customers reported. Story 81. Worked as a restaurant manager for a while. I inherited a team from a pretty incompetent guy that lasted only a year. One day, one of the older Hispanic prep workers cut her hand and we had to send her to the ER. ER calls, "Hey, we have blank here," and she doesn't know her SSN by heart. No problem, pull up her file for them. She also doesn't know her birthday. Okay. So I find her ID in her file, which is most definitely a very different and much younger person than this worker. I brought it up to the owner, and she just said, "Yeah, we don't talk about that." Story 82. I worked at a cafe where the owner started pressuring the workers, mostly teenagers, to accept cash in hand rather than proper pay, with tax taken out and super paid. She also started telling us to write orders on paper scraps and not put them through the till so it looked like she was earning less, and it wouldn't affect the welfare payments she was claiming. When I refused, she said she no longer had a position for me. I reported her to the tax office, but I don't know what came of it. Story 83. Medicaid fraud. I worked for a company that managed schools for kids who were PINs, persons in need of support, in several states. Now, if a kid came from the state of New York, the school was entitled to a per diem from Medicaid for healthcare purposes. If they were placed at one of our schools in Connecticut or Massachusetts, how should we go about getting that per diem? Register the out-of-state school as a New York Medicaid provider and bill them for the per diem. Bill the Connecticut or Massachusetts state Medicaid and let the states sort out who owes whom. Bill the children as though they went to our New York school since the names were pretty close and no one would notice. 2 of these are legal. Guess which choice we made when they found out they clawed back 5 years of those per diem. Story 84. If it's cool, I'm gonna flip the script on this one. While working at a manufacturing plant, we had a lead room where parts made of lead were machined down. We had a rule to paint all lead orange, so if it got tracked out, we could see it easily. Tons of training and required jumpsuit, gloves, breathers, booties, and goggles. Head-to-toe stuff. Well, one guy decides he doesn't want to take the time to get changed for all his smoke breaks, bathroom breaks, or lunch. So he just stops getting out of his mop suit, starts tracking lead everywhere. You know, lead? So management keeps yelling at him, keeps telling him off. They write him up again. This time he's suspended for 2 weeks without pay. So what does he do? He calls goddamned OSHA on himself to get the place shut down. Story 85. Worked at a Subway as a manager. They barely trained me and dropped me into the worst store in the franchise. I mean, place was filthy despite getting the most customers and profit. We were only allowed 2 people in the store at any given time. Then for some reason we have a itty-bitty water heater. It got busted and due to that we had to shut down. The health inspector was the one to shut us down. The owners of the franchise called me the next day to tell me the safety inspection told them we're GTG and I have to open the store. I call my district manager above me and she told me to call the inspector and do not open the store. And I called the inspector and she didn't like hearing that someone tried to open a store without her permission. Story 86. The most illegal thing for me was when I was a preschool teacher. I was in a classroom alone with 26-year-olds, which is wildly outside of the state ratio for teachers to kids. It was a terrible liability for me. And if something happened that I didn't see, could have really ducked up my future. I quit that day. This also reminds me of when my wife was working at a really small restaurant. When she started, part of the deal was she shared tips with the cooks, which might be standard at some places. But when the owners, a married couple, fired the cooks or they quit, I don't remember which, the owners took over cooking and still required my wife to give them a portion of her tips. That seems both illegal and unethical to me. Story 87. I did call center work for a large health insurance company, but mainly dealt with prescriptions, answering eligibility questions and what co-pays would be. One day, a very distraught man called and wanted his insurance canceled and refunded. He had a legit grievance, and he asked for a sup as I could not help. I went to my supervisor and explained the situation. They told me to let them know we would refund them and canceled. I asked if we were going to, and she literally laughed in my face and said no. I refused to lie to the client and would not get back on the phone with them. So the soupy let them hang up. I quit that day and went to another call center where we were encouraged to help the customer at all possible points and scenarios. Story 88. I worked as a front end for years and was promoted to pharmacy after a few years. For about a year and a half, I never got the pay increase. They promised me and kept pulling me from the pharmacy shift to do front end crap. But my pharmacy was separate from the main store, so they shouldn't have been able to do that. One day, I was basically alone in the pharmacy with a pharmacist, and the store was short-handed. I didn't have the yellow front-end shirt, but I had my pharmacy coat. The manager came down and said they had some higher-ups visiting and told me to run samples from the bakery, even though I has pharmacy crap to do. I kept my coat on and beat the higher-ups, started grilling my manager. Story 89. I worked for a company that called this suggesting the sale. When the client is in the other room, get all their information pulled up and then grab all of our supplements and add it to their visit fee. Their visit fee was already $214.95 baht, and with the supplements added, their totals would end up being nearly $600 to $800. I already explained to the manager if I do this, we are going to get a lot of angry customers and possibly lose some people. And her exact words were, our patients are already paying $300 a month, so I'm pretty sure they can afford another $300 or $400. So I did this whole suggest the sale thing, and yeah, totally didn't work. The patient was pissed at me, of course. After that, I just never did it again. What's the most unhinged thing you've seen a coworker do on the job and get away with? Story 1. Working on the railway with a bunch of crazy people. One guy brought in a rice pudding his missus made him. Another guy said he hadn't had rice pudding since he was a kid. He loved it and begged for the pud. He was rebuffed. When the guy opened his Tupperware at lunchtime, he was greeted by the imprint of a junk in his pud. He didn't want it anymore, so the other guy ate it. Story 2. When I was working as a landscaper, my crew chief used to go service the homeowner's wife while we would mow the yard. They had cameras, and the husband knew. He just didn't care. When he'd come back from his fun, he'd stop the crew and show everyone the movie he made, and would then send it to everyone in the crew. Didn't matter if we told him not to. He still did. He ended up stopping the unwanted distribution of his homemade film after one of the crew's wives saw and decided to show up and whoop his ass. When I was working as a crew chief in commercial construction, I had a foreman show up drunk as a skunk when we had the owners coming in 2 hours for inspection. We were simply the welding subs, so it wasn't my business, but I did remind him that the inspection was happening soon. Dude stumbled out of the car, jumped into the fountain outside the building, then went back to his car and changed everything, boxers and socks included. While standing next to his truck, dumped a quarter bottle of cologne on himself, took 2 pills, combed his hair back, and walked into the building like nothing happened. When I was welding in Austin, I watched my coworker dive headfirst into a K-hole on site, then came out of it right before my boss rounded the corner. My boss was only 2 years out from a bid for a first-degree murder charge, so he could spot addict from a mile away. My coworker played it off that he fell and somehow managed to convince my boss that there was no substances. Soon as my boss turned around, my coworker pulled a water bottle of kratom out his back pocket, slammed it, hit a bump of snow, and went back to work like nothing happened. When I was working as a shift supervisor of a factory during COVID, I witnessed the finest Colombian mamie I've ever seen have a train run on her by the upper management and the other shift supervisors. 6 dudes in a row, while the owner of the company sat in his office about 20 feet from the bathroom that it was happening in. To this day, I have no idea how he didn't hear. Same day, I watched 3 dudes who were purists run in with extendos and switches and chase a GD out of the job. Cops were called, shots were fired, and nobody was let go. Probably the best one, though, was when I was working at a smoke shop. The owners of the chains always had people watching the cameras. Still don't know how she got away with it. Anyways, my coworker, really my manager, went up to one of the jars we have, the kind of bud that was exotic sprayed with terps and dusted with diamond dust, and pulled out 2 handfuls of nugs and dropped them into a Walmart sack, rang herself up for 1 gram, grabbed a pack of loose leaves and a lighter, and walked out without paying. Mind you, we had a strict no-stealing policy there, for good reason. And I watched my boss fired someone who'd worked there for 5 years just because they rang up a lighter under the wrong price, saving themselves $1.09. Story 3. This is pretty gross. I worked on a small island off of the mainland, only accessible by boat. The boss had his own boat, so we would all meet up in the morning at a marina right next to a restaurant and just up the channel from the ferry station. So we had a new guy. He was supposed to be on medication, but apparently it interfered with his drinking, so he didn't take it. His dad was friends with the boss, so he got away with a lot. On this morning, he showed up in pretty rare form, obviously well hungover from the night before. So we're all just waiting by the channel for the boss to show up in with the boat when new guy freaks and goes running off behind a dumpster behind the restaurant and proceeds to defecate on the ground. Well, apparently, along with his hangover, he also had the runs. But it gets better. Despite the cloudy haze he appeared to be in, he was clear-headed enough to immediately notice that directly beside the channel, there was a water spigot. Now, for some unknown reason, this particular spigot happened to be installed upside down so that it was pointing up instead of down. This fact was not lost on new guy. He proceeded to beeline across the parking lot, pants still around knees, straight to the upside-down spigot, which he proceeded to use as a bidet. I kid you not, just as the ferry passes him by in the channel. Keep in mind, it's a no-wake zone, so we could literally see the passengers' horrified faces as they pass by in slow motion. This is but one of the many legends of New Guy. I could create at least 3 more posts with his adventures. And no, he never did get fired. We were all too shocked and disgusted to even mention it to the boss on the boat ride to work that day. Story 4. He watched adult film on his phone in a call center and told everyone that his doctor prescribed it for anxiety. I'm still mad at that company for allowing this. Story 5. I do all the hiring and firing of my crew. We hire anyone willing to do the job. It doesn't matter if they are homeless or a felon IDC. You work and actually do the job, we will take care of you. Let me introduce you to the characters. First up is Iron Man, a kid who has been living in a shelter and needing work for a minute. He might have been 21. He had mental issues and was in a home working on his mental health. He was literally working in an Iron Man suit. He was one of those kids who thought it was cool to be a dealer and give everyone in their life crap. He would talk back, barely work, and just in general was a piece of crap. Iron Man got his first paycheck and does what any good boy would do and buys his antipsychotic meds, one being Klonopin and the other Adderall. OFC, he is excited to have his meds, but he needed money, so he decided it was a good idea to drop all the pills from both bottles onto a table. He then mixes them up and starts selling them to the rest of the crew for $2. Quee Duckface coming in, who refused to buy them for $2, but FC had acid. So he gave Iron Man the acid. He obviously does it. Now Iron Man is tripping balls and starts talking to customers about his uncle, who was whispering to them to not tip him. Iron Man then loses his gloves, which means his entire universe melting down. He starts attacking people, asking about his gloves. I somehow managed to talk him out of seriously injuring someone and walked him. I was not allowed to fire. One of the many stories. I have had knives, shovels, fire stones thrown at my, all sorts of crap, and OFC, all the crazy stuff, from stuff ducking to ducking customers, while they're walking dogs to employees quitting because he left his shoes at a customer's house, and that dude brought them back. Story 6. I don't know if unhinged is the word, but I was upset that a store employee of mine got away with the following all in the same week. I handed him a broom and dustpan and instructed him to sweep the parking lot. I turned my back and he went and hid in the cooler. As I was on my way out the door on a Friday, he asked me to watch his register so he could use the restroom. As his bathroom visit reached 15 minutes, I looked for the store phone, a cordless, so I could call my ex and tell her that something at work was going to cause me to be late picking up my kid. The phone was missing. I went to the office and picked up the other extension, and the guy had snuck the phone into the bathroom and was mid-conversation with HR, telling on a coworker for being too friendly with the street people. We had just had an all-hands-on-deck loss prevention meeting where we reinforced the ideals of serving people and sending them on their way as to not make them feel comfortable hanging around because we had a big shoplifting problem. This guy took the direction to be mean to the street people and get those losers moving. He explained he went over my head to HR because it's clear that I value the friendly coworker and wouldn't do anything to correct her. The very next night, after the crowd slowed down, he made it look like he was off to do side work. But he went to the restroom to smoke. He was apparently so zooted that he spent 45 minutes in the restroom. The time came for him to leave, and he was still so blasted that he couldn't remember how to properly close his till. So he just minimized the pause screen and went home. This resulted in a $500 cash overage that my assistant had to explain the next day. HR told me that I could only write him up for one of the items, and they strongly suggested it be for improperly closing his shift. First offense. Story 7. I worked in the Safeway meat department as a wrapper. On any given day, I would start with 2 racks of meat, cut and ready to wrap. Ground beef, wholes, was processed throughout the day as needed, wrapped and put out. One week when the manager was on vacation, the head cutter took over and he was a pill. Nothing positive to say about anybody in the department, unrealistic expectations, etc. For 3 days, Idiot micromanaged the night shift, 1 to 9. Guy Bill, name because he's a legend, so much he finally snapped. When I came into work at 5 a.m. the next day, Bill was still there working. This cutter had processed every piece of meat in the walk-in. Pork, beef, steaks, ground, roasts. Anything he could cut, he had cut and put on trays for me to wrap. It was a week's worth of meat cut over the 15+ hours he had worked. There was nothing left. So I am in shock, asking him what he's doing. Bill says he was tired of Idiot telling him what to do, so he just cut everything. He was waving his 9-inch knife around as he was talking, and I was terrified that he was going to hit Idiot when he came in. But fortunately, he got tired and left at 5:30. Idiot and the store manager both came in at 7. I called them back and showed them what had happened. The store manager told me to just wrap everything and immediately mark it half price. Got some awesome steaks that week, but we couldn't sell everything and a lot of it got thrown away. They talked to Bill, but nothing ever happened. I know for a fact the store manager hated Idiot as much as everybody else did because he was always starting crap. Bill quit not long after because he refused to work with Idiot. Story 8. There was a guy who kept inappropriately hugging and touching women, primarily coworkers. I don't like being touched by someone I do not know very, very well. Anyway, at one of those group huddle things we would have at the beginning of a shift, he threw his arms around me and leaned on me from behind. I lost my crap and just about yelled, "I told you to stop touching me." He got a talking to since the managers were there to see it, but ultimately, nothing happened to him. He did, however, eventually get fired, arrested, because he came to work in uniform on his day off, loaded up a very big, very expensive television, and took it out to his car. Apparently, they had been watching him do that kind of stuff for a while before it happened. Story 9. A receptionist decided to launch a full office investigation because she thought that I stole a pen. I was interrogated by my manager and others. Everyone involved was paid very well, and the total time cost of the investigation far outweighed that of the pen. Somehow, I was the suspicious and unreasonable person in the scenario. Nobody seemed to consider anyone else's behavior to be insane. Story 10. My first job was a very famous investing company. My team lead used to curl up under her desk and either cry or sleep. And she, honest to God, got away with it because we were tucked in the back. Another guy, in it obviously, spoofed an email account from the CEO and emailed another coworker, telling them that certain privileges that they had been afforded have now been revoked. Story 11. As a teen, I was the evening manager of a fast food place that starts with a big M. Our overnight maintenance guy was supposed to show up before we locked the doors for the night, but he didn't. Our crew proceeded to clean and blasted loud music. When the maintenance guy showed up, he gets sexed so hard on the glass door that he shattered it. I let him in and noticed how drunk he was. So I sent him to a booth with a cup of coffee and told him to relax and sober up before starting work. Before the glass company arrived to fix the broken door, maintenance guy got paranoid and pulled a knife on me, shouting that I was about to fire him. One of the guys from the grill area stood between us to calm him down while I called the police. Maintenance guy calmed down, so I figured I could send him home to sleep it off before the cops showed up. Nope. When I turned my back, he dove for me. I ducked and her toppled over me to hit me as he fell to the floor. I did everything I could to help maintenance guy get away with way too much. But as the police placed him in the back seat of their cruiser, he asked if he was fired. I told him not to return for his last check and that we'd mail it to him. Story 12. My colleagues ordered a drone to the office and started flying it around the office. The higher-ups were not around that day. Everyone gathered to watch and cheer. Story 13. Got crap-faced at an after-hours work group meetup at a bar and refused the free hotel room they offered him because he didn't want his wife to get mad at him for not coming home after being at work all day. And guess what? He got a DUI and was arrested and missed all of our busy sales periods sitting in jail all weekend. Not a word, not a disciplinary action, nothing. Story 14. Loudly yelled a slur at someone. He'd quietly been before, but 100 people heard this. He was fired, but then the union got him his job back. The union rep hated doing this, but it's his job. We treated the guy like absolute garbage, and he left for a new job ASAP. Story 15. Guy I used to work with ducked the dinner lady from the office canteen in the walk-in fridge. Our boss couldn't believe such a thing had happened and basically said to him, if it's true, just don't do it again. She would always serve him plates of food that were like 50% larger than anyone else's after that alleged incident. Story 16. A single guy and a married woman had a several years long affair. Everyone knew they'd meet under the stairs and in empty rooms. It was incredibly awkward for the rest of us. Even the boss looked the other way. I don't know why. She said she tried to break it off, but the affair partner wouldn't give up. Plus, she kept very obviously stringing him along. It was both of them, making everyone else uncomfortable. Well, of course, the husband eventually found out and showed up to work several times to confront the guy. I don't know how either of them kept their job, to be honest. They created a ton of drama. They were both slimy human beings and deserved each other. That was the office consensus. Story 17. I maintained software for a number of different sites. Many of them were like early social media, and had a coworker start seeing a woman he met on a dating site we were paid to help out with. This is fine until you realize we all had admin accounts so we could do anything on their system. It was a dating site for older women interested in guys. He would bring her to work and have her sit in an office chair, and they'd talk all day. He definitely got fired for doing this. I heard my boss yelling at him from another room. Does she even know how she met you? Does she? Of the other accounts on that system, it was easy enough for him to just delete the other messages and make sure she only was talking to him. We got confirmation that is exactly what he did, and it almost became a court case. Story 18, pastor, misogynistic, patriarchal, could not take direction due to his massive arrogance. Since he would not take direction from those above him, wound up fired. His wife also worked for the same statewide religious organization. Time theft. Would clock in from her house, get paid for her 30-minute commute, clock out after she got home. Clocked in from home, didn't show up for work. Clocked out after a 16-hour day. I worked in HR and did timesheets. Since she didn't show up for all that work, I had to cover for her. I pointed it out. Guess who was reprimanded? Me. I was reprimanded for knowing. It was my job. This is only one instance of the ridiculous crap that went on there. What a joke of a religious organization. I don't work for them anymore. I don't attend any services put on by that organization anymore. And I dropped my membership last year doing the Lord's work, dishonesty, abuse, thieves. You can have it. Story 19. I was working as a line cook. We had a new hire who was an absolute ducking git. One night while closing, he was going to change the fryer oil. I happened to look over at him at the moment that he flipped the spout upside down and opened the valve. Blasted the spot I was standing 5 seconds earlier with 300-degree oil. He said he wanted to see what happened. We made him clean it by himself. He was fired within a couple weeks for claiming we weren't letting him use his expertise to make completely inedible food. Story 20. Stepped over the cord, went into her kitchen, and made a peanut butter sandwich while waiting for the next authority to come take the body. Like, dude, you've been doing this too long. I was a student. I brought it up with the partner and she said, "Oh, that's just he's like that." It was that answer whenever I questioned anything that guy did. 30 years as a paramedic, when most people quit at about 4, makes you a weird dude. Tenure of doing this longer than anyone else seems to let you get away with whatever in this job. Story 21. Maybe it's not unhinged, but I saw quite a few fights on site. A lot of people getting high, drunk, and operating machinery. Some ground workers robbed a shop by a site that they'd been into several times once and were picked up by the police shortly after because unhinged levels of stupidity. I had a pallet of plasterboard drop down from the second floor of a building, inches away from me, and I'm pretty sure the telehandler driver lifting it was drunk. Also had a buckle from a strop fire off and take out part of a wall just by me and a few others as we foolishly watched a telehandler trying to pull a truck out of a ditch. Plenty of unsafe, high-level works. Some blatant instances of modern slavery. I guess a lot of this falls under bad more so than unhinged. Story 22. I once left a job for another one as a tech contractor for a small company on the recommendation of a friend. I wound up driving the owner around. Thanks to that, I got to hear him lose multiple contracts because he started screaming and cursing at them. Not like individuals either. He had a contract for installing satellite dishes on roofs with a major provider, had being the key word. He wound up leaving the stock of satellite dishes uncovered on his front lawn where the rain damaged them. So yeah, day 3 he punches out his secretary and the guy I'm shadowing gets a text about it, and everyone acts like it's pretty normal, despite there being cops at the door when we got back to the office. So that was my last day there. I think my coworker stuck with him for a while after that though. And no charges were ever filed as far as I know. Story 23. I once had a coworker whose antics could fill up a book. But the wildest part was when he set off bomb-sniffing dogs. Basically, we were working at a cruise ship terminal, which was a high-security area. To disinfect some equipment, we were taking on-off the ships. Most of us used normal soaps/wipes, etc. But for some unknown reason, he liked to use Windex, which had ammonia, a common bomb-making ingredient. Port security warned him not to do that, but he ignored them. Eventually, it set off the bomb-sniffing dogs. Somehow he kept his job after that. He later did other things like argue with customs officers, let loose an army of mobility scooters in the passenger waiting area, don't ask. Spent around $1,000 a week on gas on the transport van. As I said, I could write a whole book on him. Eventually, he did get fired for a paperwork-related error. Story 24. Our alcoholic gum teacher came in from time to order a hot dog with everything on it and a cup on chili. The coworker O worked with, my friend at the time, did not like the gym teacher, and the gym teacher did not like him because he would talk back. I'm working at the register where he's doing the cooking. When I take the ticket back and hand it to him, he sees who it is. He takes the hot dog bun, pulls his junk out, and puts it in the bun. I say, "WTF are you doing?" He says, "Duck him." He then finishes the order and walks it out to our gym teacher. Story 25. Normally, if you wanted something to be thrown out, you could just put your name on it. Everyone respected the system. There was no stealing other people's scores. The bosses knew we took trash home and didn't care. This one guy decided a couch he wanted was just too tempting or whatever, so he shoved it in an electrical closet somewhere in the basement. It started a fire. Multiple underground floors all filled with smoke, probably 8 fire engines with dozens of firefighters, and a few ambulances responded. No one hurt, thankfully. City block shut down, the block the NY Stock Exchange is on, no less. Took hours before they finished extinguishing it, checking the large underground complex, and left. Apparently, union rules limited the consequences to being written up.